Greetings. I am Tom Earl. Welcome to the celebration. I am grateful that you are here with us today. You are valued, you are loved, and you are appreciated just as you are. Welcome back to episode 2 with the legendary, the creative, the wonderful Sam. How are you, Sam?
I'm good, fam. How are you?
Well, why don't we go ahead, wave, and then we'll go to audio. So we had started to talk, and then I was like, wait, let's talk about it on the podcast. What do you think
Absolutely.
of the new format?
I think it's great. I think it's, like I said, I think it's very organic. I think it's good always to have open, honest, authentic conversation. Huge fan.
Mm, mm. As a little, what we had started to last episode, you were like, what have you been up to? So I'll use this as a segue into what I've been up to. And
Sure.
I promise before the end of the episode, we'll talk about a Doris film
Yes,
as
please.
well. So I left the nonprofit world um, during the pandemic in 2020. So it didn't have anything to do with the pandemic. I went on paternity leave in the middle of February, and I had a intention of being able to have my marketing agency become full-time by the end of paternity leave. And one of the painful things about the pandemic is the blessings that came from it. To me, it's very hard to say that, although there is truth to it. So one of the blessings was everybody wanted to hire a digital marketing agency
Uh,
at the start of the pandemic.
mhm.
So I was definitely able to exit the nonprofit world and went full time in my agency. And this time last year, we had like 30 clients and things were humming along, had a really big staff. In fact, Jamie Dawson was one of our team members. I got to
Oh,
work with,
awesome.
I got to work with her all the time. So it kind of got to this like pinnacle of success that I had been like envisioning for a really long time. And I did not enjoy the success at all. I had found that I had really gone really deep into marketing, how to spread good ideas and empower people with mission driven businesses.
Right.
And there were a lot of ethical questions I had about what that looks like.
Hmm.
And at the same time, I really felt that while I am a really, to toot my own horn, phenomenal marketer,
Hmm.
that there was something I have that's like I'm called to do that I am applying to marketing, but is bigger than marketing. So and at the same time, the other thing was that it was also consuming my entire world. And I was like, the success is not worth my health, and it's not worth, being like, well, 10 years later, I'll finally have enough money to work less. And now my daughter's 10, and there's a void between me and my wife because my business has become my big thing. So I took the very scary step of I basically phased that product out of existence. And I spent this past year creating a new product, but that's a different story. The way it connects to us is one of the things I asked myself is, I've been doing this podcast since 2016. I've put out an episode every week without fail. Why am I still doing that? Like, I really forced myself to look in the mirror and say, like, should we keep going?
Hmm.
And I was like, yes, but it has to be different. And so that was one of the things. I was like, I want it to be a conversation rather than an interview. And I want it to
Right.
be um, camera off. And now we're not quite at a year. And I have
Hmm.
found it to be very enjoyable. So I'm happy to hear. Oh, and the other thing was I can't do like we're going to talk for 2 hours. I can't have that be 1 week's worth of episodes. I have to split it up because I can't put out a 2 hour episode every week right now. I don't have the capacity.
It's exhausting. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it can be really fulfilling if I have the space. Like if this was
Right.
my only thing I was doing
Mhm.
was the podcast.
That's some really scary stuff.
Yeah.
It's not every day you see people being like, well, this kind of success is more harmful than it is internally and externally. It is more harmful than it is helpful. I really have to rethink this. And if it doesn't work, I am going to have to let it go. Is not something you see on a regular basis. So
Mm.
kudos to you for having that
Thank you.
sense of self and, doing the right thing,
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, is there anything that is on your mind or on your heart that you want to speak to before I share on about a Doris film?
No, I'm actually, well, as you're talking about how you went full time with your business
Yeah.
and then scaled back, I'm thinking about how I'm doing something similar but different, if you will, right? Um, so I started running my LLC, like I said, from the first of this year. Prior to that, when I was running, may I share? Is that okay?
This is what I was hoping for. That's why I gave the prompt. Go for it.
Got it. Cool. All right. Prior to that, I started Samira Obeid LLC to have a legal way to not give away my labor for free. So as an immigrant on an H-1B visa, you can only work for the organization that is sponsoring your visa. You can only work for them. You cannot work for anybody else, right? So anytime that I would do a poetry show at a college or at some company or whatever, I would get hired to do a poetry show at X number of entities. Either I would have to make the decision either not to get paid by them or to take a very small amount of money from them that would not be in any way violating immigration or tax law, right? And I'm a really good poet, right? I am worth my work. I've had a lot of success in it, and I know from the conversations that happen after the show that is what lets me know that I am a good poet. And so I know I'm a good poet. And so it's breaking my heart to have to make this kind of compromise to give away not just my labor, but my story for almost nothing at all. So the legal way to do it would be to start my own company, to get paid for my poetry through this company, and to just put the money there and leave it there. As long as I'm not taking anything from that company, I was solid, right? Like I was completely above board. As a documented immigrant, I have a lot of privilege and I have no interest in trying to subvert the system to benefit me when I already have so much privilege that other immigrants do not have. So that's what I would do. I would do these shows and then I would put this money into this organization, into this company. When I started running the company full time, your perspective changes, right? Like things have to take a different route because now you're running it full time. This is your only source of income, so on and so forth. And over the course of, I started the company in 2020, over the course of about 2 years, I was doing poetry, but then I get asked to do like DEI trainings and justice and equity trainings and so on and so forth. And so I would. And when I was doing them part-time, temporarily, occasionally, once in a while like that, it wasn't as much of a heavy lift. And even though between January and August is only about 7 months, once I started doing that work full-time, especially the DEI trainings, not just because of and including the legislation that has come down from the state now regarding diversity, equity, and inclusion training, the lift became so much heavier because it became more about conflict resolution and conflict management at the expense of your own experience and your own identity when you were in these spaces that were hiring you to do DEI work, right? Prior to that, you get hired to do DEI work. Folks were there. They were there to learn. The end. Now it has become such a politicized conversation, politicized topic. Everybody feels like it is okay for them to completely lose any sense of professional conduct when they are having that conversation, especially with you, somebody who possesses most of these identities that they're having these conversations around. So the lift became so much heavier that now I too, despite the fact that it brings in a majority of my income, I too have decided it's not fun anymore. It's exhausting. And I'm not here to convince people that discrimination exists. You should not even be entering the room if you are not here to have a conversation. A, that discrimination exists. B, we have a responsibility to counter it. What do we do? Right? And you just had too many people entering the room thinking that it was my job to convince them that discrimination exists. And so in recent times, I too have heavily scaled back and will now on no longer be doing DEI trainings as of the 1st of 2024, the first day of 2024. Scaling all of my clients back. I am removing that feature, if you will, from my repertoire, and focusing more on poetry and art, because I think that's where the conversation is had best. And that's where the conversation is had at depths that I would like to engage. And from a selfish place, right? Yes, I want to meet people where they are, but I also want to meet people where I am and have those conversations too. So I was just thinking about that. That was on my heart. That was on both my heart and my mind as you were talking about.
And I'm receiving it. I am receiving it. The layers.
The layers.
The layers. Oh.
And what I'm sharing with you about my concerns is just a tip of the iceberg, you know, like we would have to have 8,000 sessions to like get through all of those layers and unpack them, right? You know this.
It was one of the questions I had wanted to ask was around where do you feel the state of DEI work looks like for folks who may not know. It's diversity, equity, and inclusion. That's the abbreviation we're using. So you gave me kind of a little bit of a quick synopsis there.
Mm-hmm.
Are they usually like 1-day events too that you're being invited into, like a 4-hour 1-day event?
Not necessarily. So the clients that I typically work with, we have like we have either a 6-month or a year-long plan. The thing with DEI is it has to be sustainable. It has to be consistent. You can't do one DEI workshop and expect any kind of culture change, right? And so one of my requirements for any client is that you are willing to work on this at minimum, and I'm being incredibly generous here when I say at minimum 6 months, you know? And so a lot of my clients are either 6 months to a year. We'll have a series of plannings, series of sessions, depending on the structure of their organization and how they want to sparse it out. So do they want to do leadership, middle management, employees, staff? Do they want to do board of directors, staff, volunteers? Just depends on the structure of the organization. Based on the structure and the number of people and who the people are who are responsible for most of the deliverables of the organization, trainings are as deep and long as necessary, depending on that structure.
And so then people are coming in there kind of with like an axe to grind, like, oh, finally, I have one of you in front of me.
Correct.
And I'm going to now share with you why the things I've read on Reddit and why I think this is BS, and it's your turn. What do you have to say about that? Like that.
Correct. Right. So people misunderstand a training for a panel discussion.
Yeah. Or debate.
Yes. Or like
my mind.
I'm a guest speaker at your organization. Come, let me be your piñata or whatever. You know what I mean? Like they're looking for a scapegoat upon whom to take out their frustrations. Because these folks are also working for equity organizations. And so I assume there must be a certain amount of,
I thought you were talking about for-profit companies. So you're talking about the nonprofit industrial complex.
Yep, absolutely.
Oh my God. I shouldn't be surprised.
Yep. It's hard not to be surprised, though. I mean, we've worked for nonprofit organizations with such a heightened passion and met so many other people too, right? Who have worked for nonprofit organizations whose intent and impact impact is not always pure, but intent most certainly is, and who are willing to be on that growth pattern in order to improve themselves, even when their impact is harmful. And then you enter a room where folks are just there to take out their frustrations on you because they couldn't do it anywhere else. And you have to understand, Tom, given the way that I look and all of my identities, I'm an immediate trigger point when I step into certain rooms. So that can be, you're navigating all that because they might not realize that they're giving that off, but you certainly feel it as soon as you walk in. Yeah, there's no amount of therapy for that.
And it really is different as a consultant. Like, it's one of my challenges I was doing a lot of consulting from between 2014 to 2017. And I got really involved in working with school districts. And admittedly, my challenge was even if it'd be a group of 100 people, I could create, for the most part, a breakthrough in the room, but I wouldn't know how to now apply this systemically to an entire school district. That's when I'd be like, I don't know how y'all take this and apply this to your whole school district. That is where my expertise runs out, and you need to bring in someone else. I can create the aha here. So more or less, I can facilitate dialogue, but I don't know how to then apply that to systemic change. And that was my always really big challenge and self-awareness of I think people hired me a lot of times. I do think I am good at dialogue, but also because I'm a safe bet as a straight white guy. And I also have performance energy, welcome everybody. So it's oh, let's bring in Tom. And so I kind of just started to feel once again, I guess this is a theme, I have this skill, but I don't think that this is where my skill is. I think I'm a little bit a part of the problem. Just a little, you know what I mean? This is not helpful.
Right.
It is, but it isn't.
Yeah.
So different situations, different time period, different perceptions. But so on top of that, you're in Florida in 2023.
Yeah.
And like you said, with the way who you are and the way you look. So my heart is with you.
I appreciate that. It's all, I keep telling people, it's a pendulum shift, at some point, the pendulum will shift and suddenly everybody will want. So when, for example, 2016, after Trump got elected, humans of color was suddenly the thing, okay? Especially brown people of color who were not racially black, right? We were suddenly so popular. Everybody wanted us on every panel. Everyone wanted to learn from us. Nobody wanted to learn from the black person. But everybody wanted to learn from, because we're you're a person of color. So look, I'm a good white person paying you to come do this. A, asking for your opinion. B, standing with you in support of you in the street. C, all of that jazz, right? And so there's all of this rage and rave around having people of color represented with, as usual, the token black person present. And that was the rage. That was just how it was. And then the moment there was a shift in terms of Biden getting elected or Trump not getting elected, or enough knowledge having been acquired for people, for white folks to be able to talk about intersectionality, enough knowledge having been acquired for, certain topics that otherwise we had the knowledge and other folks, majority communities, did not have the knowledge. Once they had come, sat with us, learned from us, they had the knowledge. Now they're like, wow, I have the knowledge. Now I'm the expert, right? And so even in that, even in the nonprofit community, even the activism community, a lot of that started happening where majority community folks felt like, I don't need Black and brown folks to do this work. I can do it myself. And then in 2020, once the president's office flipped, and then George Floyd was murdered, the protests happened, and a lot of allies started showing up to these protests. That sentiment of, I know what it is to be in harm's way. I know what it is to be an expert on nonviolent action. I know what it is to understand anti-Black racism and systemic discrimination. That just further solidified people's, majority communities' resolve in, I was at this protest, I have every right to talk about anti-Black racism from an expert perspective. Mm-hmm. I was arrested. I have every right to talk about the prison industrial complex because I was a victim of it, right? Without taking a step back and thinking about, but what are the ways in which you were never impacted because of who you are and how you look? Mm. And that played out so deeply and so heavily and en masse, in numbers, across the nonprofit and the activism community. It really was, I don't want to use ableist terms. It really was just so shocking, like it was a shock to so many of our systems that the people that we trusted and the people that we fought with side by side would betray us that way. Mm. Mm. So that was unfortunate. But it's a pendulum shift. Mark my words, wait and watch. Once that shift happens back again in 2024, we'll be all the rage again.
Yeah, and I see it like, because the pendulum, if we think of it as a pendulum, is so short, right? Because it is very reactionary, right? Oh my gosh, because usually like it's the explicit discrimination that we just can't stand, right? The implicit subconscious inertia of our culture, like that is like we kind of want to get back to that, right? Even people, if the Republicans would put up somebody who could be a polite racist again and like just gently pass all these horrible laws, but be very kind while you do it. Like if that's what people want, right? That's just, don't make it as me, like be discriminatory, but don't be as obvious, be more smiley. And so I think it's when these big flashes of like very, you can point to it like, this is bad, I disagree with this is, then all of a sudden people come out of the woodwork. But I think especially around 2020, that was very much, because that's when I was in the for-profit sector, that was very much a PR situation.
Oh, 100%.
Like, the industry I was in then, the coaching and course creator industry, all of a sudden, all these podcasts that only had white guys featuring white guys, all of a sudden now wanted to talk to, like you were saying, somebody who was Black.
Correct.
And then 2021 hit, back to white guys. Back to our regular scheduled program.
Yes. Don't call immigrants rapists and drug dealers. As long as you don't call them that, we'll be fine with you having circular saws at the bottom, right? As long as you don't call them those things and you're not that cruel about who they are, we're totally fine with you not making any space for them.
Yeah, and I think it's really a desire of like maintaining that inertia towards the privilege in all the categories. Like,
100%.
look, I only know white guys, so it's not my fault that when I just have my friends on that they're white, like these are my friends, or the only referrals I'm getting are white because that's who I know. Like, well, that's inertia. Like, that is, you are going to be pushed towards that. And if there's no repercussions or the opposite, usually when you are going to push against that, you're going to have resistance. So there's no, and unless you care, right? Unless it comes from somewhere bigger than caring what people think about you or how you look from an optics perspective. Like, it has to be bigger than that for it to become meaningful.
Absolutely. Some sort of external force. And I don't mean force that way. I mean force in terms of, like, you're talking about inertia.
Yeah. And I think, you're to the folks out there who are, and I think there are a lot of us who are in, tell me what you think of this statement, that there's most often in some part of our identity, we're an ally. Like, there's going to be at least one.
Absolutely.
I mean, not forever, but there are people, but like, and I think whenever you step into that ally role, and I'm imagining that term's probably outdated, you're gonna make mistakes, and it's usually going to be mistakes with something you really care about. So it feels even more like, ugh. And then you just want to hide under the covers and not say anything. But it's a relationship. Like, it really is. I don't know the words, but it's receiving feedback is going to be, and accountability is going to be a part of the process. It's going to bring up one's relationships with insecurity. And I think a lot of it is people's perceptions of you. And when it feels like you messed up, it's like, well, now everybody thinks this. And I thought because I was here, everybody thought I was the good person. But now you're telling me I'm the bad person. Well, I want to be the good person. So I'm going to go hang out with people who tell me I'm the good person.
Right. Yeah. And I think the sooner people start realizing that accountability is a love language, the sooner allyship won't be something that you can gain points in, That's not, because you're right, it is a relationship, and that's not how relationships work, right? It makes me feel bad for people, not bad in a condescending way, but I wonder, let's just say that, I wonder with people who react so quickly like that when somebody holds them accountable, I always think to myself, how many genuine people who actually do care about you do you have in your life that you would react this way? Because as far as I'm concerned, if the people that I consider to be in my inner circle and, who love me and care about me are the people who don't correct me when I'm doing something wrong, then that means to me that they are not invested in my growth or my betterment. And that means they only care for me in this moment. They're not invested in me as a full, complete individual. They're only invested in perhaps what I can bring to their life in this moment. And that makes me question so much about how we engage in the relationships that we are in, all relationships, right? Not just romantic relationships, with parents, with teachers, with friends, with colleagues, with comrades, anything and everything. If we are so resistant to accountability, have we ever really known true relationship at all? True friendship, true love? Because for me, accountability is my love language. And if I don't have people in my life that are telling me where I've messed up and telling me where I've messed up, but also giving me grace to do better, and I am not receiving that information in a way that is compatible to both of us, then what's the point? You know, it makes me question how we relationship.
And just a little, and I have a feeling you're going to agree with me on this, just a little nuance on one thing you said. I think it can be really hard, especially for us people pleasers out there, to bring accountability to somebody, because especially if you've experienced where conflict has led to abandonment or violence, or, you know, where you try to hold somebody accountable and there was distancing, or that it can feel like there's somebody in your life who wants to hold you accountable, but is so afraid of conflict or holding someone accountable that they just keep it bottled up inside.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's like, that was also one of the things I really realized doing a lot of facilitation, was like, this has to be addressed holistically, because so many of these things like are deeply rooted things that are normally like worked out in therapy. Like to be able to be held accountable, what we're talking about is you have to ask yourself, well, what's your relationship with conflict and with holding someone accountable and being held accountable? That's like, you just got to start there, like even before we apply it to anything.
No, absolutely. I mean, I agree with that perspective. I think when it comes to allyship, though, there are so many more factors to consider when it comes to safety and harm. In terms of, I want to say the broader brushstroke of how much more systemically allyship can be harmful, as well as when it comes to allyship, it can be harmful both systemically and in the moment, in ways that certainly many relationships can also be. But there are so many degrees of power in allyship and so many degrees of systems present in allyship that I think it requires a large extent of self-awareness. And I always encourage people to take that self-awareness work into heavy consideration before entering into an allyship role.
So I feel like there was something in what I said that you wanted to clarify or phrase differently. And I feel like I kind of heard it. Is there's something you want to make like explicit though, just in case I or the folks listening didn't hear it? Or would it be helpful for me to repeat back to you what I feel like I heard?
Yeah, tell me what you heard.
So at first I was like, oh, wait a sec. So I'm going to kind of start from the end. So I feel like I was hearing you say like, okay, that stuff may be true, but if you are going to step up and say, well, now I'm an ally, that before you maybe step up in like claiming leadership position or like some sort of like reliance upon you or face of something or something like that, that you should already have done like a certain amount of work so that there doesn't have to be kind of like a hand holding or a like the lack of self-awareness can have profound implications, especially if when accountability is brought in, you're not able to receive it. So like if you're going to say I'm an ally, like a requisite of that is that you are also signing up for all of the self-awareness work you need to do, whether it's in therapy, reading books, anything like that. Like that's a part of signing onto the dotted line.
That is correct.
Okay, cool.
That is correct. Allyship comes with a lot of work, and it does not have to be conflict forward. It does not have to be, it does not have to be allyship work. I think a lot of people misunderstand for requiring to be conflict forward, and it does not have to be conflict forward. You just have to choose the space that you want to be in as an ally and choose it wisely with a lot of self-awareness for what you have capacity for. Because without that degree of self-awareness, you're putting a lot of people in a lot of harm's way.
And what does conflict forward mean?
The opposite of conflict averse.
So when you say it doesn't have to be conflict forward, I don't know if I understand.
When I say it doesn't have to be conflict forward, I mean you do not have to be an ally on the streets if that's what you're not prepared for. You do not have to be the ally in the room that engages in verbal sparring with your racist uncle. All of that is not required of you, and that definitely should not be the first step that you are taking, right? But so often than not, so much more often than not, a lot of allies, their first step against racism, for example, is I'm going to join that protest. And when I join that protest, I'm going to do all the things that protesters do. And if you've never been in a protest before, if you don't know what it entails, if you do not have the self-awareness to recognize that you are not a one-person protest, there are other people over here, and all of them have many differing identities. And all of those different identities experience your behavior with different levels of impact. And while you might not be a one-person protest, you can singularly change the way this protest goes down, putting a lot of people in harm's way, right? And so I am more pointedly referring to the 2020 protests that happened after George Floyd was murdered. We saw droves and droves of allies come into the street and create more harm than they did good, and that was rough, because we also had so many allies who were doing such fantastic work on the streets as well. Allies also who were harmed by those allies who were doing this for the first time and jumping in completely with absolutely no tools or awareness whatsoever and expecting to be welcomed with open arms no matter what their behavior.
Thank you for clarifying. I really appreciate that.
Yeah.
Okay, well, oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, sorry. I just wanted to say, I'm just cautious about, yes, there are so many reasons why people behave certain ways. And yet I'm cautious about not allowing those reasons to be held by folks that never consented to doing so to begin with.
Do you mind clarifying that or expanding?
So like what you said, right? There are so many ways in which people are afraid of conflict. There are so many reasons why people are afraid of accountability. It's possible because of the relationships they've had in the past have also not welcomed or provided accountability, have not welcomed or provided conflict in a healthy and nurturing and compassionate way, right? And all of those things are incredibly important in the conversation that we are having, and they're incredibly important in the conversation on relationships. It's hard. It's a delicate balance to say, yes, all of these are 100% true and work needs to be done there. And at the same time, it is not the job of Black and brown humans who are actively being impacted by the systems that we are living in, who are literally fighting for their lives every day, to have to hold that when they are being presented with somebody who considers themselves an ally.
So it might be, if we were to like psychoanalyze why this person's doing it, maybe it might explain it, but it's no excuse, and it's most certainly not helping. In fact, it's creating harm.
Correct.
Yes. So it's like, well, I had traumatic relationships when I was growing up. That's why I'm doing this. You gotta let it go. Like that's not the response we're encouraging.
Correct. We
More
understand that you had traumatic relationships growing up, and you still do not get a pass on your behavior, because your behavior is yours. Ultimately, it's your responsibility.
Yes, I'm with you on that. Is there anything else you feel like we should clarify before we head towards the wrapping up?
No, I think it's great. I don't think we intended to go into such depth, but depth is always good. So love it.
Yeah. Yes, we did. I wanted nothing but depth. Okay, but what we didn't plan is that we wouldn't leave ourselves some time to talk about a Doors film. So this is like the cliffhanger. We will talk about it next week. I promise. We'll be disciplined and starting next week with it.
Excellent. I love that.
Okay, Sam, gloriously self-promote.
All right. Well, y'all can find me on Google at Sam Poet Tampa. If you Google Sam Poet template. It will take you to my website, which is samiraobeid.com, SAMIRAOBEID.com. That will lead you to my website. On my website, you can find all of my work. You can find a bio of me, everything that I do, so on and so forth. And all of my social media. Feel free to follow me anywhere you like on my socials. If you would like to sign up for my monthly newsletter, I only send it out once a month. I do not communicate with people outside of more than a month, outside of just a month, because I do not like spamming anybody. Feel free to sign up for the newsletter. And if you'd like to contact me for performance, workshop, training, whatever that might look like for you, we can absolutely customize. Feel free to reach out at Samira Obeid LLC at gmail.com. That's SAMIRAOBEID LLC at gmail.com.
Y'all, Sam is what is the word I can use? Transformative is a overused and sometimes watered down word. So I want you to throw that out and really, when you hear one of Sam's poems, I think transformation is you are not the same person who you were when the poem began. That is Sam's poems. So listen to Sam's poetry. Now imagine if you are the host of a venue or a school or anything, and you want to create transformation in that space. Imagine having Sam for a day or a feature, and then getting the opportunity to have her create that experience where you all can express yourself with words. So if you feel like I am doing a pitch on Sam's behalf, you are correct, because you'd be a fool not to hire Sam to do poetry or facilitate poetry at your space. Okay. So for us here, we host a journaling community, and every month we get together and we go through a journaling process I've created where it doesn't matter if you've ever written a day in your life or you write all the time. It gives you an opportunity to create in a process-oriented way where you're able to put the inside onto paper so it can be reflected back to you. And you get access to a private podcast as well as a 30-day journal every single month. So we'd love to have you join us. tomearl.me/DCM invite. That stands for Direct Connect Method invite. Sam, what is your invitation? What would you like to invite people to do, to be, to think about, to consider, to evolve into? What's your invitation?
Well, given that we ended on the topic of allyship, I would like to invite folks to think about allyship not as the absence of hatred or bigotry, but as the action of support and solidarity. Think about the ways in which we won't put a number on this, the ways in which you can in fact be an ally through action as opposed to being an ally through the absence of certain behaviors. Allies through action. What does that look like for you?
And like last time, I will build on, I share an invitation too. So I'm going to build on Sam's, and it's going to come from a past guest who says that when she got hired somewhere, they had listened to the podcast, much to her horror. You know her as well, Sam. She goes by the name of Samira Obeid. So she often shares with me, and I feel like this came up in this episode. She says to me, Tom, the interpersonal doesn't always apply to the systemic. So that is where I started to talk about some interpersonal things where if you're one-on-one with a friend, that doesn't always apply to systemic work. So that's abstract, but start to think through that in your own life, what that can look like, what that feels like, and go ahead and listen to that episode too if you'd like, the episode with Sarah, as it lives on in infamy, much to her horror, forever agreeing to be on Tom Earl's podcast. All right, Sam, thanks for episode 2 in the books. Looking forward to episode 3 next week.
Love it. Let's do it.
And to all those listening, as always, we're wishing you peace and blessings. Thank you.
One more thing. I'd love to continue the conversation. Feel free to join me at tomearl.com/join. Subscribe below, or let's connect on social media. Tom Earl Artist. Thanks again for watching. Bye.